Okay, welcome back. I don't know what Mr. Producer is going to be calling this show, but the question comes in as, what do you think of triangulation? That sounds like something pretty horrible, doesn't it? Triangulation. This comes from Lazedreamor. Um, thank, thank you, Lazy. But before I thank Lazy, I want to thank Wendy and Nancy D and Jacqueline M for their really kind contributions and support, keeping us trucking, as I say, keeping us moving. So, ladies, thank you ever so much. Um, and anybody else, thank you all for your sharing, liking, subscribing, do all the above. And we're just about to reach 19,000. I'm very surprised, very pleased. And I'm pleased at the generally really nice reception we're getting for the work we're trying to do here. But we need to jump right into this because Mr. Producer needs this yesterday. He's got a really busy week, so I got myself a little window of time. I make him sound like a tyrant. He's the sweetest guy on earth, almost. So what do I think of triangulation? I'm going to show you some symbols here before we start, so you know what I'm talking about with this idea of triangulation. And what we have here is a whole bunch of videos, images, sorry, excuse me, that relate to the geometrical aspects of any image that's sitting in front of you. And so here's a bunch of them. I'll just show you what I mean by, everybody knows about boxes. If you have and I'm going to explain to these with an image in front of me, but Amy Moore talks about ovoids. Boxes can be tilted. You can draw a box tilted. Sometimes an L or a T are easier to understand the width to height of something. But you understand that this is providing a width to a height that are very definitely based on points in the thing you're looking at. So what I'm saying is the point angle game can be extended to the idea of geometrical shapes. And your work is common. It doesn't mean you want to draw triangles and geometrical shapes. Don't even bother. It's not even part of the game. I mean, somebody in their method may want you to do that, but I'm showing you something that's far better in a sense, because you're drawing always what you see, but there are underlying geometries, and you need to see them. The one that our questioner talked about, the Lazedreamor talked about, is the triangulation. That's a triangle. So you have 3 points. Any 3 points in a picture can be turned, and ought to be turned into triangles. And you need to look at them to see how deep the triangle is and how long it is. You see what I mean? And immediately you have a sense of whether or not yours is that same triangle, or you can get a concept, having looked at 3 points, whether or not that's, and then you draw it, and then you look at it and see if it's the same triangle. I mean, it's rather a simple process. Anytime you have 2 points, like say we're talking about Sargent and a point here and a point there, and there's an angle between the two, there's an implied box, right? So if you had a point here and a point here, there's an implied length. There is a length and there is a width. And again, those could be done on a tilt, so you could be doing it this way. These are just, but you'll see what I mean immediately, I think. And I think, I thought I was being self-evident talking about perfection and all that stuff, but this may be it might be the most self-evident thing that there is in drawing with your eyes. You see what I mean? And trying to understand what you're drawing in front of you. I don't ever not do this. This is basic to what I do. Let's just talk about it. So I'm going to show it to you with an image here. It's a little distorted. It was shot, this thing looks like it's shot from a side angle, so it's not quite the right proportion. Unless I just do that in bad demonstrations. And you can see the angle's different even of this stuff here. This isn't, normally I line these things up pretty well right at the beginning, so in relation to horizontal. But, so that's a little distorted, and the viewing point's a little different. You can see the point of this thing is in nature here, and this shot is well over here, whereas the point here is almost plumb with the side over here. So you can see the camera angles in relation to nature aren't the same as the viewing point that I took when I made this demonstration. Now, let's make it real simple. Let's talk about triangles, okay? Anytime you have points, you have geometric configurations. Anytime you have points. So we make points for that purpose, right? There's a point right there. Now, if you have this thing ending right there, there's another point, And if you have a point here, that's another point. Anytime you see 3 points, you certainly have a triangle. And you want to consider, is that triangle tilted to the left? What's its gesture, the gesture of the triangle? But so they have a point up here, and you have another point down here. And any, as I said, any point you want to choose, but between here and here. And points, that's what one of those things that makes points so valuable is they're not just mushy little spots. This is more mushy over here, right? Or even curves. Curves aren't very helpful. They're more helpful when they turn a sharp corner, then they almost become points, and they can be used as point angle things. But we're actually looking for things that make points and that's what we're floating. You understand? That's what we're floating out there. And we're floating them with the idea of understanding the triangle from this to this to this, right? Now, we don't just sit there and belabor it. We put a point down. You may have already had, say, this and this going as the bottom, and you may have already had something going on up here, and now you're establishing this point here. Now you have the problem of getting that point, the right distance between these things and all those sorts of things, and then to make that triangle that's then left over here, is that the right width to its height, and does it have the right tilt? It's pretty straightforward. Triangles are very useful. By the way, that's the simple answer to your question, triangulation. It sounds like strangulation. I can't tell you I like that picture, but a different word might be more fun. But if you're looking at nature here, you can see why we might grab onto a spot like that, because it makes a point. Sometimes a spot, just because it's isolated, makes a point. An exit might make a point, but it's not a great one. Or at least not the way I'm thinking about it right now. Highlights can make points once you have them. So that could be a point, but it's not a hard point. It's not a really fixed one like a geometry is. So any place you can see it, like a blob here stops, it can be said to make a point, and you can do an angle to something with any old point you want. So all kinds of things in here are making those kinds of points. I happen to work from the strongest to the weakest, if I can, or the most obvious. So it might be this thing up here trying to be the point. And as you can see, well, maybe you can't see, but I'm trying to make this as reasonably like in value and an effect as I can in each of these places, so it begins to rather look like itself. That's not the point, to look like itself, but it's to make a good point. That's why you're doing it, okay? All right, so having said that, you can begin to see that we might begin to have between this point, and then the sides of these things, we might begin to have what you might consider a box. Now that box could be extended to go right to the top. This could be the top of the box here. And you can see a certain width associated with this height. Now you can also see a certain triangle associated with the very highest point, because that's sort of a soft edge. It's not that easy unless you do some particulars in here. But nevertheless, you can see that going from just the widest points of this, that's one box, and it seems to be more nearly square, if not squashed, whereas this other one is a taller box. And as I said, once you've made enough points, and you could treat this like it's just a bad drawing, once I've made enough of these points and related them to this, I can begin to say, oh, my box isn't the same as that box. And you need to adjust it till it is. I mean, that's what we do. And the fun part about painting is if you fix the top and bottom and the width is off to the height, we're not changing the top and bottom anymore. It's just a width problem. And so we've narrowed down the possible corrections, really limiting them, which means you're going to get there faster to the corrections, to the adjustments that we talk about in the other videos. So you can see reasons to pick things that are strong and have good points on them. And then you can make geometries all day long with that kind of stuff. I mean, you can make ovoid circles too. I mean, like a thing like this here coming around, you could say coming around to here, it has a certain gesture or tilt to it. So let's go back to that. This thing here, this is what we mean by an ovoid. And any group of points can make an ovoid. We could take this top of this, the bottom of this, if we say we started out here, you can go all the way over to here, say parts here, and you can see that there's an ovoid. That certain parts of this thing, if you take those into consideration, then they have a certain height to a certain length, there's an ovoid. And that ovoid will have a certain tilt to it. You see what I mean? So I've talked about triangles, I've talked about boxes, and I've talked about ovoids. Now you could talk about just T's, if you want to talk about T's. You say you have a distance, let's see, what do we have so far? T's or L's. They don't have to actually be straight line units like this. They can be. For example, if you're trying to get this angle and you actually have something like this in there, then that becomes an L, yeah. But any set of points can make an L. I prefer the 90-degree L, a real honest L, so to speak. So if I have a point here and I have a point over here and there's this thing right here, it makes an L. It may be a tilted L. Well, you can see how an L isn't that much different from a triangle. But you may only be trying to figure out how the length feels to this length, right? So, and so it goes. Come up with it, whatever, come up with your own geometries. But be imaginative. What we're looking at is abstractions. Minimally, we have value units, right? So if you're looking at let's see if we can find one here that might be a useful one. Oh, well, you could take in all this junk here. It's got darks on it. This side, contrast on this side. You can see that there's a sort of an ovoid there. There might be a whole series of ovoids, each of which has to be the right height to width and the right tilt. And I'm just showing you that values make up their own units that have their own ovoids. And no matter what the shape is, you can think of it abstractly as an ovoid. Yours just simply has to be doing the same thing. This isn't a very strongly expressed one, but it's trying to be the right height to length of ovoid. They need to end the way they look in nature. Don't make this stuff up. Like, don't make a triangle. Don't make a box. Make the shapes. Make the look of nature wherever you see it, and use it. So if you're making this over to here, make it. Make this down here. Make it, and now make the ovoid that might be associated with it. Get whatever elements form the widths. Get a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and get this thing to show its, and get your painting just to be corrected to that. This is one more point of correction. Let's talk about the figure. In the figure, so typically a vertical thing, a standing figure. So you have in most instances you have a useful vertical. Maybe something like the inside of the foot plumbs with the left side of the neck or something like that. Well, that's important. Vertical is always important. Every time you have angles, you have vertical. You have to consider vertical, right? So you have a width down here. That's a width. If you have something that really reads, like it's this point here, so trying to make a point, that's what I'm very much trying to do, an adequate level of a point. To another point over here, you have a width that can actually be read as a width to a height, right? Now you'd want to think of it, I prefer to think of it as more of a straight across, so I might grab this or that point and use that width and just go straight to the top of the head and say, how wide is that? All you want to do is make a correction. If yours doesn't feel like it's the same width, it should be a no-brainer that it's either too wide or too narrow, because it can't be too tall if these are fixed points. If you set the top and bottom, it's just a width correction problem. Do keep remembering that every time you have an angle, so when you do put this in and it's a point, and you have an angle, two other points up here, there is an implied width. If you were to drop a vertical, there's an implied width involved in those sorts of things. And if there's an L, that's useful, or you can think of it as a box. It's just, you think of it as a box all day long if you want to. You can think of this, say this width right here, you can say, oh, look at that, this is almost the same width as this. And then suddenly, without just ignoring all this stuff in your mind, even though you may be drawing it, you can just notice whether or not this thing that's created as a box here has the right tilt to it and is the right width for the length associated with it. That's all we're doing. Nothing much more dramatic than that. It isn't about legs and the sizes of legs. The triangle, you have a triangle in the face. We don't have a theory of face triangles. It's a such and such to a such and such proportion. You simply are putting in these things in the places that they belong, and whatever triangle shows up, say a corner of the nose to the eyes, you get that triangle right. You get its width right to its height, and you get, if it's got sort of a tilt to it, you get that to look right. If you always make these points with the data that's there visually, it'll be amazing how much it looks like you're actually, when you're just making a triangle, you're actually making a face. Half the fun of this stuff, isn't it? By the way, there are a lot of things in faces, in heads that are literally like an egg. Well, you can think of that as an egg. You don't draw it. You don't need to draw it as an egg. Well, I recommend you do blob it in as an egg, but then you articulate the contour the way it looks, right? You don't want to be making it a phony egg, because you can't do very much with that. You do need these points for plumbing and other things. So, but that's a very useful thing to have that exist in your mind as an egg with a certain tilt, a certain proportion, or a circle or an oval, but with a certain tilt and a certain proportion, right? And then you're not just limited to the mask making you an egg, but you might grab the top of the whole head here and think, if you go right through here, what kind of an egg is that? Or if you go all the way around through all this stuff, there's another egg. Each one of these is an egg. I'm just saying, reflect on these as you're looking at your picture and see if your egg is their egg. So you know what I mean? If it has the same gesture and proportions. Or your box is their box. So I was showing you I was showing you this. I think that's called a tetrahedron. And I stand to be corrected. I can't remember if that's what it is. But you may see things like that in a shape like this, right? Now, you don't have to be making that and say, oh, I got to make the tetrahedron or whatever that is. But you simply have to notice that yours has the same proportions and the same tilt, if any, as that you're seeing implied in nature. And of course, you still make it out of the shape that's there, make whatever shape is there, but just notice whether your tetrahedron is the same as its. And that could be something like down here. It could be the same kind of a thing, to some significant point. If you can easily see it. I don't go looking for trouble. If I can't easily see it as that, I don't make it up in my head. I mean, there are some places, by the way, that rather become triangles, like this whole thing here becomes a triangle. I'm not looking for things like that look like triangles, but when they do, or the shadow unit, when they're triangles, get the triangle, get the tilt and the proportions of the triangle. And again, as I said, make it out of exactly what you see, and you'll have no problem at all of moving this thing right along. Again, most of this is you're drawing shapes. You're drawing a shape like this, or you're drawing certain aspects of shapes like this. And you're trying to get them right to other things. You're trying to get this point lined up right with points like this. They just happen to include, if this point goes to this point, and there's a certain implied, or even if you have three of them there, this is a certain height here to a certain length, you already have a triangle there. And it's very important to notice whether yours is the same triangle and make a quick correction. It's a 2 seconds worth of review. And you just do this. You do this repeatedly. You do it over and over and over again. Even under here, you can say, once you have this, you can see whether or not the box created by this to this, ending down here and lining up here, this whole thing could be seen as being the same or not the same. That's what you see in nature. It's a little bit in the camp of what Max Meldrum is talking about when he says, see if it overlaps, see if it would be exactly the same. If you could merge that shape or the whole thing, of course. But so, yeah. But you can take anything you find useful. You might take something like this because it starts sort of a sweeping oval. You can see, and maybe you can see it coming down to here, and you start thinking, what would that oval be? Is there an oval through the body here? Well, it's okay. It's okay. People do that. Some people with their methods, even I think you see that implied in Raphael sometimes, that he will take circles. I'm not saying draw them. In fact, I don't want to draw them. I don't get any pleasure in that. I like to draw exactly what I see. But you don't want to. These things you can't escape from. You have to use a system like this. There are geometries in painting. It's a two-dimensional thing, and fortunately, just two-dimensional geometries. And these things get a lot easier as soon as you see the painting is already flat. So, I don't know. This won't be the shortest one I've ever done, but I don't have much more to say about that. All over the place in this thing, you're going to see, if you're drawing, if you're watching your canvas, you're going to see shapes, right? They're going to have heights to widths. They're just patterns, right? Now, you can worry all about these bumps, or you can look at this generic shape, make all the bumps, make them exactly the way they look, but make sure this shape here is the right height to width, right? And to whatever extent you have anything like this to something over here that goes to some height over here, say, make sure that L, that the width of this is the right height to that, right? This has nothing to do with just simple proportions, which have to be, they precede all this stuff. When you're working, you need to have a fixed top and bottom, whatever the points are that you choose to use, called top and bottom. But you also then need to be very, very solid in your subdivisions. Anything near halves, the major subdivisions, big subdivisions like that. These are pretty important. And if you can't get linears right, and again, when you have a place like this, and you don't know if it's in the right place, the right question is, when I'm looking at the top and bottom, should that be higher or lower? Vis-a-vis nature's, that set of proportions in nature. So you get a concept from nature, and you look over here and see if it's implying the same concept. But make sure you do linears because all the other things hinge on linears. But there's so many things, and as I said, the point's the key. Anything that can make a useful point, that spot right there might be a really useful point. Then you can make triangles. This is why this drawing looks like this, because these are good points. I went and looked for places that would serve as points. I didn't fake them. I didn't make them up. I didn't exaggerate them. They're there because I need them, because I want them, okay? But they're also there visually in a strong way. I'm looking for strong and pointy, you might argue. And then, of course, immediately you get triangles that go to these points. So all I'm saying to you is just observe the triangle, and if yours isn't the same as the one in nature, you got a correction to make. Very straightforward, just a quick review. It's a quick review. Just check you could say this thing could just be called check your like triangles. What's the other word for triangles? Check your two-dimensional shapes. Right, just check the ones that are implied, the geometrical shapes. Just check. They're all over the place. They're everywhere, and be inventive. This is where you can get creative. See shapes that you've never seen before. If you've been seeing the same shape, you better start seeing some other shapes. Do you see what I'm saying? And they can be very, very different. I mean, like even this thing here, the idea of this sweeping arm and how it feels to this. Now, look at that big sweeping tetrahedron. Does yours feel like that one? Does yours do it? Well, do you have the good data that makes the points adequately for you so that it can be service points, right? And then do you have it beautifully said? That line that you've drawn so carefully, so specifically. Have you got it swinging this great abstraction? So don't be limited. Have a party. You know, Michelangelo talks like this. He talks about this beautiful line over here being picked up by some beautiful line back here. I think that's the word that he uses for that is counterpoint or something like counterpoint. Or this one, how it picks up this one. Well, these things all have a certain width to height to them too. There's certain geometrical or proportion aspects to them too. And so you don't have to limit it to a very square triangle. It's just, the triangularness is enough. Even a thing like this abstraction right here has a certain triangularness, has a certain tilt to it as a triangle, if you want to call it a triangle. You can think more specifically about one point on it if you want to talk about a specific triangle, or you can take any single point. Every one of these points has so many possibilities. This can go from point A to point B to back to point C or whatever. You see what I mean? And it can do it 18 different ways and does. And if you go blink, just quickly glance through these things. Just notice your triangles. So thank you, Lazedreamor. You want to keep being lazy if this is what lazy is. But you don't draw them from these triangles. You draw what you see. Just enjoy drawing what you see and check. Notice things like triangles. Notice the boxes, the proportions, the tilt of these patterns, which I keep forgetting the name of, but these shape types, these two-dimensional units. What are they? What are the geometric shapes, I guess? Okay, guys. I think that's it for this week. Again, Wendy and Nancy D and Jacqueline M, you're the best. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. To all of you, keep on subscribing. We have a pretty good rate going. It's really, really fun to see us approaching 19,000. Just amazing. I know we're overdue to do something live with you. I got to get onto that. I got to figure out something fun to do. Think about it with me, Mr. Producer. I know you're totally hectic this week, but okay. That's the story. You guys make of that what you will. I could keep talking about it all day long, but it'll ultimately come back to saying the same thing. Check your boxes. See you the next one. Hope you have a great painting week.